Hi everyone and welcome back. This is Mindy for Honeybee Stamps, and in today's video we are going to be doing some water stamping using our stencils. This is a really fun technique to add a little more texture to our backgrounds and get more uses out of our stencils. For today's technique, I'm going to be using the Hexi Patterns stencil. This is a 4-piece stencil set from Honeybee Stamps, and I'm only going to be using 2 of them, but this is a great stencil to add to your collection, and it's great for layering. I'll be using a piece of Nina Solar White cardstock. This is 80 pound, cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And my ink combinations are going to be Speckled Egg, Peacock Feathers, and Chipped Sapphire Distress Oxide inks. I'm also going to be using just a foam blending brush for today. I like to use these when I'm going to be laying down a heavy coat of ink. The blending brushes are definitely a favorite of mine when I want to do more of a soft background. So using the foam, I'm just going to load up the ink on that foam applicator, and I'm bringing it onto my cardstock using circular motions. I'm going about 1/3 of the way down, and then I'm going to bring in the peacock feathers and blend those two together. Then I can bring in the chipped sapphire, and I'm going to actually flip my card, and I will use a post-it note to protect my fingers. And this is just so I don't get fingerprints on the other part of my cardstock that I already ink blended. So that's just protecting the area and my fingertips. I'll apply the chipped sapphire going into that peacock feathers. The blend doesn't have to be perfect, but I do like to go back over it just to try and even that out a little bit. Then I'm going to bring in one of the stencils out of that Hexi Patterns stencil set, and I'm going to spray the entire back of this with some water. This is just some clean water I have in a water bottle. I'll spritz the back of that just so it has some of the water droplets you could see there. And then I'm going to flip that over and place that down onto my ink blended cardstock. I'm going to take a piece of paper towel and I'm going to lay that over the top so that will soak up any of the excess water that might come out. And I'm going to put my Misty tool on top of this. This is just something heavy to hold that in place, and I'll leave this sit for a couple minutes. Once that's dry, I'll go ahead and remove the Misty and the paper towel, and then I'll carefully peel back my stencil. And what's happening is that water reacted with the Distress Oxide ink that I created, or that I ink blended, so it's creating this gorgeous pattern on top of our cardstock. This just adds a little bit more interest to our card. Now I'm going to do one more background. This one is using Peacock Feathers, Salty Ocean, and Seedless Preserves Distress Oxide ink. I'm going to start with the lightest color, which is the Peacock Feathers, and just applying it the same way I did before, which is just picking up some of that ink and then going in a circular motion starting at one end and adding it onto my cardstock about 1/3 of the way down, and then coming in with Salty Ocean about halfway. And then I'll turn that and add the Seedless Preserves. Once again, I'll protect my fingertips with just a post-it note, or you could use some post-it tape. And the Seedless Preserves and the Salty Ocean, I did go back over it a couple times just to try and help blend that a little bit better. And then once I'm done, I'm going to take another one of the designs out of that Hexi Patterns stencil set. This one has a little bit more space that the water is going to sit on, which I think is going to create a really interesting background. So this time I thought I would step it up just a little bit. I have a little mini mister bottle here that I have some water and perfect pearls in. I just scooped in a few scoops, shook it up really, really well, and then I'm going to spray this stencil. Now I am kind of protecting some of my work surface with just a paper towel so I don't have a huge water mess there. So I just spray that generously, and then I'll flip this over on top of my ink blended background. Then once again, I'll place a paper towel over the top just to catch any of the excess water that might seep through. And I will lay the Misty on top of that and let that sit for about a couple minutes. That just helps the oxidization process, so it's really going to bring out that kind of whiteness that it creates. So after letting that sit, I can remove the Misty, peel back the paper towel, and then carefully lift back my stencil. Now, because we had added perfect pearls to this, this is going to change this up just a little bit. You can see it's got a lot of shimmer and shine to this, and I'll bring it closer to the camera in just a second, but I really like how this one turned out. I was a little nervous with all the space for the water to sit, but I like kind of those scattered droplet looks in there and really loving the shimmer and shine on this. Now I'm just going to help speed up the drying process on this using my Wagner heat tool, and then I'll set them off on the side to work on my sentiments. For that sentiment, I'm going to use the Friend stamp set and the honey cut die. There's 3 layers there for the Friend honey cut die. So what I did was I went ahead and I cut a bunch of the Friend scripty word using white cardstock, and then I have 2 of them cut for out of pixie dust cardstock, which is a white glitter cardstock. So after I had ran these through my die cut machine, I was just poking out those insides with my craft pick. And now I'm taking that first shadow layer and die cutting that from pearlescent vellum. The reason I have so many of these die cut is I'm actually, well, for one, going to do both cards at the same time, and I'm going to layer these together. So instead of using foam tape for dimension, I'm going to layer them with the cardstock. So here I just added those with some liquid glue and my tweezers, so that is 2 layers. Now the front one is going to have 3 layers. I'll have 2 layers of the white cardstock, and then the top layer is going to be my pixie dust cardstock or the white glitter cardstock. So I'm going to take this first layer, so this has got the 3 layers of cardstock. I'm going to add this to the pearlescent vellum shadow that I had die cut, and I'm going to just use the liquid glue for this. And I'm just using little dots of the glue. Now, if you ever feel like you have too much on there, you can just dab it away with your fingertips. And I like to use my tweezers to kind of guide where it's going to go. And also, don't forget your tittle, so the dot of your eyes on the word friend. And then once that's done, I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to add glue to the back of the words on this. And this is going to attach my other layer that I had created. Now, it probably is easier to add the glue to the other die cut words, but this works too. So then I flip that over and adding those other 2, this is a 2-layer piece, adding that to the back of it. So that's just creating dimension instead of using foam tape, is I'm just using cardstock instead. And I really like how this came out. It was just enough dimension to it without being too bulky. And I repeated those same steps using the other die cuts, so I'll have 1 for each of my cards. Next, I'll work on my stamping. So I'm going to use that Friend stamp set, and I have 2 sentiments that I chose that I'm going to stamp out. One says hello and one says hey there. I lined those up onto some black cardstock, and I'm using my mini Misty. This is the collaboration Misty from Hero Arts and My Sweet Petunia. The only difference is it's black, and I love the color black. I prepped my cardstock with an anti-static powder tool and then inking up my sentiments with a mini Versamark ink pad and stamped that down onto the black cardstock. Then I'm going to just sprinkle on some white detail embossing powder. Make sure those are nice and covered, and then I'll heat set that with my heat tool, making sure that it's really nice and hot before coming to the front and heat setting that embossing powder. And what I like to do is take a Swiffer cloth once that cardstock is cooled off, and I just brush over it to help remove any of that excess powder that was there. I'm going to take this and trim these sentiments down into a really thin strip, so I'm using that plastic guide to help line up and make sure those are the same width across. And this is using the Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer. This is the smaller of the 2. And then I'll set those off on the side so I can work on the rest of the card. I went ahead and die cut out some card bases. So this is just using white cardstock. This is 110 pound, and it's going to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm using the Gina K Designs dot runner to attach my card front to that base, and then I can start adding in the die cut words that I had done. So I just added some liquid glue behind my words and added that to the front of the cardstock, just pushing down and giving that a second. And now for the smaller sentiments, I just cut up strips of white cardstock and added my black cardstock piece to the top of that. That is another way to make sure your dimension is all the same if you wanted to keep that in mind. And it's also just a really good way to use up scraps and in case you run out of foam squares or foam tape. Now to finish this off, I'm going to add a few of the confetti mix. This is going to be from the Aurora Lights confetti mix, and I just placed them around my sentiment. I added some liquid glue behind each one and then just pushed them down with my tweezers there. So I'll give you a close-up look of the nice shimmer and shine this background created, and also the glitter cardstock. I really love how this one came out. I wasn't expecting to love that shimmer as much as I do by adding that liquid pearls, or that perfect pearls mix. So I'm going to finish the second card the same way as I had done the previous one. This time I added that black cardstock to a strip of cardstock, and then I'm trimming it down. That was a little bit better for me, so I could make sure it was an even piece across the entire back, and then adding that to the front of the card as well. I'm also going to add the embellishments to this card as well. And when it comes to adding embellishments, for some reason, I've always done just odd numbers. That's just one of the first things I learned in card making, was using odd numbers with embellishments. It's just kind of appealing to the eye. And also, I try to draw it into my focal point. So my sentiment is the focal point. So I have 3 on top, 2 on the bottom, just kind of drawing your eye in more to that focal point of the card, and then just attaching those with the liquid glue. Now I had noticed that I had a little bit of a straggler, I like to call it, on that hello, where my heat embossing, I had a piece of powder there or whatever had happened. So a little trick that I had learned along the way, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my craft pick and I'm just going to lightly scrape that away. Black cardstock, it really hides a lot of any imperfections. So I just kind of lightly scrubbed that away, scratched that off, and that's going to make it look like it heat embossed perfectly. That finishes up the cards for today. I hope you enjoyed this technique and will give it a try. This really does help get you more out of your products, and especially your stencils. They're a really reasonable price to begin with, and by finding these new techniques, it really stretches them out even more, getting more bang for your buck. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great day. See you next time.